Hello everyone, this is Jatin Purohit. I'm joined by our VMUGPune customer leader, Uday Dukar. Along with them, we have steering committee members, Siddharth Swami, Vivekanand Brother, Piyush Saraf, and I would like to welcome our community members for taking out time today and be part of this session, right? Frank, just to give you the perspective over here, vLeaderConnect is a webinar series where we talk with technical leaders like you. And we try to understand your side of stories related to technology and business and how you have grown yourself from level 0 to where you are right now. So in this episode, community members, as you guys are seeing and witnessing this, we have Frank Denneman with us. He needs no introduction, but still I will give a brief introduction and then hand it over to Frank. Frank is a chief technologist in the Office of CTO. Cloud Platform Business Unit, and he is the renowned author and blogger at VMware Technologies. So he has authored plenty of books. If I have to name a couple of them, then vSphere 6.5 Post Technical Deep Dive, one of my favorite, Frank, and vSphere Clustering Technical Deep Dive series. So without wasting much time, Frank, why don't you introduce yourself and we can start our conversation from here.
Cool. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to the community. It's always been a pleasure for me to talk to people who are interested in this technology outside of the Netherlands. I'm born and raised in the Netherlands, in a town nearby Amsterdam, and I've been working for VMware for now in total more than 8 years. I had a brief pause. A couple of years, and we will go into that later, I believe. I work at the Office of the CTO team at the Cloud Platform Business Unit within VMware, and that means that we are responsible for the core concepts like vSphere and vSAN, VCF, and all those products. My responsibility is resource management, especially on the compute side of the house. I understand storage, but we have two extremely strong chief technologists at that area as well, Duncan Epping and Cormac Hogan. So let me focus on something else and let them focus on the storage side of the house. Yeah, that's what I do. So what happens is I look at CPU, I look at resource management as a whole, but now with the introduction of other accelerators such as GPUs and FPGAs and SmartNICs and CXLs, I start to look at that as well.
Thank you, Frank. That's really exciting of hearing from you. Before we get into the technical stuff, I'm sure for most of system administrators, they look up to people like you, Duncan, and there are few more into this particular category. So I just wanted to understand, how did you rose your career from a system administrator to a chief technologist? I mean, there must be an exciting journey to it, and I'm pretty much sure that our community members will learn few tips and tricks from you.
Okay. So that's a while back when I started. I'm 44 years old right now. So I've been in the IT for a while. I started out as a third line as a help desk employee, helping out on Exchange and Microsoft Exchange. And I was working at that time for the Royal Dutch Steel company, which is now owned by Tata Steel, by the way. They recognized that I understood the technology quite well, so they moved me into the architects team for Exchange, and within no time I was one of the two architects that delivered a full global platform in 28 countries running Exchange 5.5 for, at that point in time, we were talking end of the 90s, I think around 40,000 email boxes. So it was back in the day quite a big environment. So we moved off mainframe mail systems into a Microsoft Exchange system. Now, we ran that platform for 5 years until 2005, and then we thought instead of running it on physical, let's run it on virtual, because another team was they introduced virtual infrastructure with ESX 2.5. Actually, it was called still ESX back then. And when somebody was a funny story. Somebody of that team, he called me over and he said, "Do you want to see something really cool?" And I'm like, "What can it be?" Because I run the one of the largest exchange environments in the Netherlands. So how cool could this be? And he showed me vMotion. Well, and I was sold from that moment. So I'm like, let's focus on this stuff now, because this is really exciting. And so we moved all the exchange all the exchange servers from physical into virtual on HP DL585s, so quad socket AMD systems, and into a centralized storage system and HP EVA 5000 back in the day. But having so much email systems on that system, well, you can guess what happened. It didn't perform. And so I had to dig in, and I had to learn really quickly about networking, about centralized storage, about virtualization, about actually NUMA systems, and how that actually worked with ESX. So I got this steep learning curve, but I think I pulled it off. And then I figured out that, hey, something is not right here. And so at one point I started to look at the storage system, and there wasn't that much information. So I started to reverse engineer the EVA platform, and I found some interesting shortcomings, let me put it nicely. And I spoke with HP, and so they flew me over to Nice, France, where they have that development team of HP back in the day. And so I actually educated the HP team on how their EVA worked with Exchange on ESX. So that was a fun moment. And that was the point in time where I also started to blog. And that's one of the key moments of my career that took me a while to understand. And so the idea was that I've built this concept, or this part of the knowledge that was quite unique in Europe. I was one of the few that had such a massive environment running that load on these components. And so I was an independent contractor back in the day. So that was my unique selling point. And so I started to look at what happened in the community. So first, the community existed out of the VMTN community forums, but people started to use Twitter, and people started to blog. People like Duncan Epping, Scott Lowe, Chad Sackage, Vaughn Stewart, all those people, and Ken Klein. And so I looked at that and I'm like, should I do it as well? But now if I start to talk about what I've learned, I'm losing my unique selling point. And so I'm giving out my secrets to other people. And so I'm not unique anymore. But along the line, I started to think, well, if people don't know what I know, how can they know to hire me? So it becomes this advertisement, this sort of commercial. And so I started to publish my thoughts and my findings on those topics. And so I reached out to Duncan actually, and I didn't know Duncan at that point in time. And I said, maybe you're interested in my blog as well. And so he tweeted, and then basically my viewership exploded when he started to retweet my stuff. And I think that helped me to become well known within the Dutch community, at least. That led at one point to VMware reaching out to me. Actually, Duncan reached out to me and he said, "Look, we've got this project. I think you're the one that could do this. Do you want to work for us?" And I'm like, I'm an independent contractor. I have my own company, so I don't see that really happening. And so they came up with this solution that they would hire me. So I was the first external PSO person within Northern Europe. So I worked on some projects for VMware, and then VMware just reached out to me and said, look, we'd rather have you internal than external. And at that point, I moved over to VMware, where I worked at the PSO team for, I think, 2 years before I moved over to technical marketing, because I wrote so many things about DRS and resource management. And then I started to write a book with Duncan on the HA and DRS clustering deep dive, the 4.1. And so it led to me transitioning to the global office. And an interesting thing is, so we wrote the book while both Duncan and I were stationed in London for the first vCloud Director project. And so in the evening, so what we did on Sunday evening, we flew to London, and on Friday we flew back to the Netherlands and spent time with our families in the weekend, and then every week we were in London. So during those evening times, we were talking about how we started. We both started with MCSE from Microsoft, and how those books were just a collection of screenshots, and how to say, click here, click there, and now you have this done. But I wanted to show what happens in the background. So if you click here, that happens. If you click there, you are impacting that element. And so we came to the conclusion that maybe we should write a book about HA and DRS. Funny story, we were talking about it and we were figuring out the depth of the book. And so we came to the conclusion, how many people would be interested in this book? So I said 80. And Duncan, I believe he said something like 300. And I'm like, no, you're crazy. Because there's not 300 people in the world interested in this stuff. I think in total, we sold over 100,000 copies now, all the books together. So we got it wrong a little bit. But that led to the technical marketing, to my technical marketing position within VMware, where I focused on resource management, and I did that for 2 years. And then the founders of VMFS and VI and all the other components, they started their own startup, Phoenix Data. And so they reached out to me and they said, do you want to be part of this journey? And I thought that was the point in time where everybody was psyched about startups and everybody was focused on startups. So I took the risk, and I worked at that company for 3 years before it was bought up by Nutanix. And then VMware reached out to me again, said, maybe you want to come join us again, and we have an interesting project. We cannot tell you what it is. You just have to say yes. And so I'm like,
we know that.
right. And so a couple of the exec called me and mailed me. A lot of people that said, no, really, this is something that you really like. Come join us again. And so I was a part of the initial team that released VMC. So VMware Cloud and AWS. I did that for, I think, more than a year. And then I moved over to the office of the CTO, where I'm now focusing on AI, ML, resource management, and that stuff. So that's my career in a
interesting. It is interesting. Before I move on to a few other topics like NUMA, DRS, AI, ML, I just have a personal story to share. What you said is you started writing the blogs and it has impacted your career, but you don't know how much it has impacted our career in VMware platform. So I remember when I started my career in 2014, it was vSphere 5.0. And one day I was just doing the ES6i upgrade and I disabled the DRS cluster on vSphere platform. I did the upgrade, went home, and suddenly my manager calls me and says, you deleted the resource pool. And I said, no, I did not delete the resource pool. He said, you have the events and logs. It is showing you deleted the resource pool. I said, I don't see any correlation between resource pool and DRS. And he said that DRS is the root resource pool. And I did not understand any of those things. I just started my career, had 6 months of experience on VMware. He sent me a link starting yellowbricks.com. I went there, I read the entire resource pool, I understood that. And then I started making a habit of reading the blogs. What happens after 1 year is we were troubleshooting an issue. It was an SAP virtual machine where I recommended SAP engineers to reduce the number of vCPUs. They argued why. And I said over provisioning is not good for VMware. They again argued. At that time, I sent your blog stating NUMA, right? So, I mean, this is the kind of impact, engineers have on their career. If you write a good content, if you write the genuine content on the blog, this is the impact which, VIAdmins are experiencing from Yellowbricks, your blog, common blog. So first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for writing all these blogs. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Always great to hear those type of stories, because when you write stuff, you always think like, is there anybody interested in the stuff that I write? And apparently there's some. So awesome. Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
So honestly, Frank, I mean, we all have that moment in our career. Any VI admin where, Duncan and your blog came to the rescue for all of us. I'm sure everyone who has enough experience in VMware, you guys have saved a major production outage or somewhere.
No, I remember when I started my career into vSphere, it was 2009, and the first layer of virtualization for me was ESXi 3.5, and we had recently done the upgrade to 4.1, and I was just the new guy in the team. So I was doing something and I did some mistake, the same way, right? I didn't understand HA, DRS and all. So I was playing around with the cluster and I said, why somebody has enabled it? We don't need that. So I switched the HA off, and it was my bad luck. The same night the host went down, VM didn't come up. It was a big escalation, and then they came, okay, who did that? Obviously, it was me. And then I remember there was one guy in my team. He handed over the HA and DRS Deep Dive 4.1 book. I still remember, yellow color book to me. He said, okay, go and read this. And we are revoking your access. Okay. Until you complete this book, we're not going to give you any access rights. So that's my side of story. And that's how I came to know who's Duncan Epping and who's Frank Denneman. So yeah.
Cool. Nice.
This is just these are just fanboy stories we are telling to you.
But it's always cool to hear those things, and to be honest, the books are on my desk as well, because sometimes I'm like, how did it work again? And so I have to go back to my own content, or to Duncan's content. And interesting enough, like you said, you need to read this book first before you are allowed back on the system. Internally, when new and where interns join VMware, and especially when they want to interact with the DRS team, they actually get a copy of the book, read this first, so you get this basic understanding, and then we can have a conversation. So it's I heard that in different companies. This story. Cool.
So
cool.
Yeah,
Frank,
definitely. Go ahead, Jatin. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Frank, you are well known for NUMA. We have a couple of community questions on NUMA as well. But before I touch upon the community-based question, right? vSphere 7 has been re-architected in a big way, right? Now we are focusing on containerized workload. We are focusing on GPU-based workload and AI/ML workload. Where do you see NUMA consideration are playing into the big picture of vSphere 7?
Yeah, a good question. And I think it's interesting. NUMA is interesting for different types of workloads, the normal workloads that we've been running for many, many years, but also now for workloads that use an accelerator, or that need to have an extreme low latency connection to a device that basically puts them on the network. Because if you look at the CPU itself, you have the CPU with the memory controller integrated within the package itself, and so it connects to localized memory, or you have this interconnect that allows you to connect to the other socket, and then access memory. But something that hasn't been explored that much, and I've done that recently on my blog, or I think half a year ago, is that we a while ago they moved the PCIe controllers also on the package itself. In Intel, that's called the ON core, and that is all the crucial components that are not computational, but are a part of a controller mechanism. So the PCIe controllers are now on that device, so on that CPU package. And so that means that if you insert a CPU package on a motherboard, it actually hardwires to a particular number of PCIe slots. And that means that if you insert an accelerator card, what you essentially are having is a NUMA locality from a PCIe device as well. Because one thing that you, especially with machine learning, is machine learning uses data to get predictions. Really, really simplified. And where is the data living? Typically is that storage layer. And so at this point in time, and I know that NVIDIA is working on this, but there isn't a direct memory access from the accelerator device into the storage layer. And so the data has to flow to the system itself, to ESX itself. It has to be stored into memory and then into the accelerator device. So now there is this local path, or the shortest path from storage into the accelerator device, but you have to use memory. So the last thing what you want to do is to run your application on the CPU 2 while your accelerator device is run on CPU 1. Because now data is stored into memory on CPU 2, and it has to flow through that interconnect, which typically has a smaller bandwidth, and then it has to flow up to the accelerator, right? So that's an interesting point, and I've been talking to the core engineers about this, and many engineers are interested in solving this, but as of now, we don't have that solution yet, because there's so many different problems to tackle in order to get this right. So it's a complex scenario to solve. And so I've wrote some Power CLI scripts in order where you can understand the locality of the PCIe device to the NUMA system. And so if you have a particular workload that uses a pass-through device directly connected to GPU, for example, you can, I think in that point, for that use case, it makes sense to pin that particular workload on that NUMA device. So you have this advanced setting, NUMA locality, and that says, run my CPUs in this NUMA device or in that NUMA device. It's different than CPU locality or pinning it to a specific CPU, because then you basically say this virtual machine can only run on that CPU. It doesn't state, by the way, no other VMs can run on the CPU. So I always compare this to having your favorite parking spot in front of the office. I only want to park there. And so if you arrive in the morning and somebody else has parked there, you need to circle around on the parking lot until that person leaves, right? Well, maybe it's the only parking spot actually used, but you decided I want to park there. That's CPU pinning in a nutshell. And so with NUMA locality, you say, I only want to use the VC or the physical CPUs of this NUMA node itself. Right, so that's the Amazon delivery guy sitting at the door. So that's what I see now, and I think that we're going to solve this in the kernel, but it's going to take a while.
It's going to take time. Folks who are new to the vSphere and VMware platform, we will be sharing you articles which are documenting NUMA topologies and explaining the NUMA technologies in detail. So we will be sharing you in the chat, and you guys can take a look at it after the call. Frank, we have a very specific question from one of our community members who works for SAP. We know that we are doing some great stuff in terms of our scalability part. Update 1 has recently introduced 768 vCPUs and 24 TB RAM, right? Now the question is, there are times when we cannot accommodate the virtual machine workload to their NUMA characteristics, right? Ideally, the virtual machine should not share the NUMA nodes, but if there is a case Is it preferable to enable the hyperthreading or have the NUMA node share on the workload? So what's your take on hyperthreading and the NUMA node sharing?
So I believe that hyperthreading for most of the workloads are beneficial because other systems can be scheduled as well. So if you look at the whole scheduling of within the kernel, it's a multi-layered system. So we have the physical layout, and the physical layout consists of CPU packages, so NUMA nodes with memory, and then your cores, and then within the core you have a shared infrastructure of multiple SMTs, symmetrical multi-threaded, or hyperthreads. Let's use the simple term hyperthreads. And so what the CPU scheduler does within the kernel is it decides where to run a particular vCPU, and the focus is always to run it on a full core, because that's where you have access to the lower level of caches. So the L1 cache, the instruction cache, the data cache, the L2 cache, and then the shared L3 cache. But sometimes it's not possible because there's so many things going on. For example, the schedulers and the whole kernel needs to run as well. And so if you just carve up your entire system and run a lot of vCPUs, we need the ESX need to run as well somewhere. And so it can use those hyperthreads to quickly sneak in a particular process in order to schedule something and then back off again, because that's the way ESX is designed, to keep the overhead as low as possible, because the whole goal of the kernel is to run workloads. So the last thing what you want to do is to consume everything that you give it to them. So it tries to be a low overhead system, and in every release that we are doing, we're reducing the overhead of the system. And so if you disable hyperthreads, you're reducing the scheduling opportunities of the system itself, because what we have with the CPU scheduler is that it understands the difference between scheduling a vCPU on a hyperthread versus scheduling it on a core. Because if you schedule it on a hyperthread, that means that something else is using the same infrastructure of the core itself. Because it's so busy, there's only one thing. Let's keep pinning out of the equation on this. So it's so busy that you need to share something, right? And that means that it's not fair to others in relationship to the priority that you have as a virtual machine. Meaning that if VMA can run on a full core, that amount of time being allocated to the virtual machine is not equal to the time that you're giving to a virtual machine that needs to run on a hyperthread.
Right.
And so what we do is we calculate, and when I say we, I mean actually the kernel. I'm not doing anything. the kernel is understanding that, hey, there's something else going on the kernel. Maybe there's some excess on cache, or there's some pipeline being used. I'm going to give you a coupon of CPU time. So I'm going to reduce the amount of time spent on the CPU, and it allows you to run again for the same price. However, this really comes at a price, because now you need to be scheduled twice, and you're scheduled in what's called a quantum, the amount of time being scheduled on the process. And so you're taking longer, because now you have to basically schedule in 2 different times, and thus time basically passes, right? So it's still not the optimal thing, but it's better than not having to be scheduled at all, because if you disable HT, then you need to wait until a full core is available, and so you cannot sneak by, and you cannot, right? But there are some workloads that don't like hyperthreads. That's basically the extreme time-sensitive workload, or the extreme latency-sensitive workloads. And I'm really talking about nanoseconds here, right? So those workloads, for those workloads, I say disable hyperthread on your system, but for the majority, for 99.5%, keep it on. It's
Right.
we have done a lot of work on getting to an efficient point, right?
So this was the question posted by Ritesh and I. So I hope, Ritesh, you have got the answer. 99% keep the hyperthreading on. And if your workload is highly resource sensitive, disable the hyperthreading and make sure you follow the NUMA topologies.
Yeah.
Now I move to Udayandu. He has some questions related to DRS. So then, Uday, why don't you start with the DRS question?
Absolutely, Jatin. Thanks for starting so nicely. So, Frank, I mean, after having a brief discussion about NUMA, I mean, it won't be with justice to DRS if we are not going to talk about how, with the outset of vSphere 7, we come to know like there are a lot of changes has been done on the algorithm level, right? So, would you mind explaining us a little bit like what all changes has been done in vSphere 7 to the previous version so that we can get some clear-cut understanding on the architecture level?
Cool. We'll try to do my best on DRS because it's so complex that I believe there's only one person in the whole company that really understands it. The idea is that we need to look at history first. We introduced DRS in 2006. I always joke that's 1 year prior to the introduction of iPhone 1. So it's that long ago. And so remember the time when the iPhone 1 came out, that's where, and you have to think about it from a data center perspective. We're trying to consolidate. We're trying to provide an efficient way of running as much as workload as possible because we're coming off from physical work, from physical machines, and they were doing anything, maximum 10%. So let's try to consolidate as much active workload as possible. And that was how DRS was designed. So consolidate active CPU, active memory. But along those years, virtualization meant so much more than consolidation. It started to focus on how can I operate my data center in a better way, mobility, automation, and all those things. And so what you saw was that virtualization became the primary platform for workloads. And so a lot of our customers said, I'm not going to over consolidate anymore. I'm not going to over commit anymore. I'm going to provide an X amount of memory, and I'm going to fit the workload demand into that memory capacity. And so there wasn't any focus on active workload anymore because DRS needed to figure out a way to work with consumed memory and with absolute capacity numbers. So that triggered us to start rewriting the DRS algorithm. And overall, DRS exists out of two big elements, the initial placement phase and the actually load balancing phase. And we introduced initial placement first. We actually did that in 6.5. We slipped it under the radar, so we already introduced vSphere 7 DRS as initial placement in vSphere 6.5, and in vSphere 7 we all introduced the load balancing algorithms into the on-prem version of vSphere. And so the big difference is that the old one was focused on the load balance of the host between the host in the cluster itself. So we looked at host A, what is your load? We looked at host B, what is your load in C and D? And then we compared the difference. And then that migration threshold determined the acceptable difference between those machines. So if you did it aggressively, the difference between those hosts were really minute, where if you slide it to the left, it was a bigger difference, and so there was less load balancing involved. But that basically said we care about the consumption of the host itself, not actually the happiness of the workload itself. Because what we said, if everything is balanced okay, if everything is not up to the top consumption, everything should be happy. But that's not the reality. And so in vSphere 7, we turned it around and we said, no, the primary algorithm should focus on how happy the VM is, meaning, are you getting what you want? Are you getting what you're entitled to? And so the algorithm started to look at the overall score of a host with regards to the consumption of a virtual machine. And now we built this algorithm in such a way that it's pluggable. We start off with CPU, memory, and network, but by creating this new framework, we can start to introduce different metrics as well. We haven't, but that's the possibility. So think about at one point GPUs or particular NUMA elements or FPGAs or whatever, right? And so what we do is when we look at the workload, we look at, okay, what are you getting? And on which host are you getting that? And so we look at the host itself and we look at CPU. So what defines the happiness is actually the threshold itself of the cluster. And that threshold is same thing as like this metaphorical gas pedal. So the moment you move it to the right, you basically press on the gas, like this is aggressive. And that means we reduce the amount of headroom that a host can have in order to, how can I say this? In order to create a particular cost involved. And this is a little bit of the secret sauce. So I need to move around it. I cannot expose everything about it. So what we do is that if you have that threshold slider on the default, we basically say up to 50% of the host utilization, we tell you from CPU or from memory that this host is perfect for you. And so if it goes beyond that 50% of total load, then we're going to look at the actual utilization, and we're going to compare the utilization of all the other hosts involved. So we do this for CPU, we do this for memory. We don't do that for networking because there is no overcommit into networking technology, and so we use the overall utilization of the NICs itself. And so we calculate a particular score of CPU, memory, and network. We combine that together, and we say this is the score of the virtual machine with regards to the location where it's running right now. And now I'm going to take a look whether another host actually can provide a better score. So maybe 4 hosts are beyond that particular threshold, but the 5th one isn't. So that provides me a better score because I don't have enough cost involved to run it there, because I have more headroom, and thus there's this high possibility that if I want something, I can get it. Right? That's the idea. That is not only about this is what I get right now. It's also the possibility that, hey, if I want to increase, what can I do? And so then we decide, hey, this host seems to be better. Let's move it to that host. So in a nutshell, that's it. But it's an extremely difficult algorithm to understand, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And I've been looking at this for half a year, right? So I'm still working on an article explaining it in depth without confusing it too much, because I believe just listening to myself that I confuse most of the people on this call, right? So including myself. So yeah, it's difficult. Yeah. It's a difficult account.
And to order to simplify it, it's the comparison. If I have to do with DRS with vSphere 7 is, earlier it used to be host centric. Now it's a workload centric.
Yep.
Workloads are changing. Now we have virtual machine, we have GPU workloads, we have plenty more. So now this DRS is very specific to the workload characteristics. That's really great. That's really great.
Hey, in fact, if you see these days, the nature of workload is also different, right? There was a time only virtual machines and more or less Red Hat or Windows virtual machine used to run. Now we have a workload which is very specific. There is a workload which requires only GPU to run, right? There are container-specific workloads which are a different monster altogether to handle. And then there are some virtual machines which, like people who, work on monster VMs, they have like high requirement for vCPU and RAM. And I don't think we can use the same yardstick to measure everything on the
Right.
same way, right? Which have been using, right?
Yes.
Now, if you see AI ML coming into the picture, that's going to be a different ball game altogether.
Yeah, and you raise a good point with containers versus VMs, because there's a different churn involved as well. Like when you power on a virtual machine, you provision a virtual machine, it's expected to run for 2 years, 3 years with an occasional reboot, but that workload should be present in the cluster for that many or that long period. But with containers, if you look at cloud containers, they typically run for a day or maybe for 2 days. What we see in the enterprise, the customers that are already using containers, we basically see a churn of a week or a little bit longer than a week. So that means that there is a higher distribution or dynamic element to the workload coming up, going down, coming up, going down.
Right.
And so that algorithm needs to change as well. And so we expect that at one point, the enterprise containers have the same churn as cloud containers. And that means that we need to have that DRS that can instantly understand what's going on. So we reduce the time to the invocation time, the runtime of DRS from 5 minutes to 1 minute. So every minute it looks, and that provides us or what you will see is that instead of seeing this bulky moment of the emotions happening at particular times, you will now see a gradual stream of emotions in your data center. And that's a different operational model, and maybe some customers need to get used to that. But I think that's a better, more stable way of using the resources itself.
Okay, that's really nice. Piyush has got some question related to vSphere with Tanzu.
Yeah, Frank. So you are also leading vSphere with Kubernetes, and yeah, we have seen. I mean, this is one of the biggest release VMware has said in a decade, and customer is very excited about it. So are our audiences. Would you like to put some light on vSphere with Kubernetes and latest upgrade on it, and how it all fits in together with the current scenario in the current picture?
Yeah, so that's a topic all by itself, and that can spend many hours, right? So the overall idea is that we see that the majority of new workloads will be containers, the majority of workload will be containers in a way that we see that a lot of companies have a developer team, but also companies that don't have developer teams. We see that a lot of software vendors are looking to use containers as their distribution model for new type of applications. And so what we see, and I think IDG made how can I say this? They did some research and they said that in the next 5 years, 40 million workloads will be containerized or whatever. It's insane. It's an insane number. And so that's coming onto our platform as well. Now, our platform is designed for virtual machines. So we need to figure out how to run containerized workloads if we want to service our customers in the best way possible. And so we started in 2016, a while ago, to integrate Kubernetes into vSphere. And we had two goals. We had the goal of that it could run a container as a first-class citizen, and a way to run container platforms, orchestration platforms such as Kubernetes, on top of vSphere. Because what we've seen that a lot of the containerized platforms, the Kubernetes, are virtualized. Even in Google, even in Amazon, they are virtualized, right? It provides you this endpoint where you can distribute or deploy your container, but at the low part, it's still a virtualized environment, interestingly enough. And so we looked at integrating Kubernetes, and that means that we had to understand the elements involved, and so we created a model where we could introduce what's called a spherelet in the ESXi host. So it can interact with a Kubernetes control plane. The control plane runs in virtual machines on top of vSphere, but the spherelet is introduced in every kernel of the cluster. And so every host that runs that spherelet and that connects to that control plane automatically becomes this Kubernetes worker node that can run containers. But in order to run a container, you need to have typically a Linux operating system, because a container isn't really a thing itself. It's just a collection of processes and operations, right? So, and we're not a Linux operating system. A lot of people thought that for a long time, but we're not a Linux operating system. So we had to find a way to create that model. And one thing that we do best is create virtual machines. And the benefit of a virtual machine is that you have this strong security isolation aspect to it. And so what we've done is we created this lightweight virtual machine that only uses our own para-virtualized devices. So we control the drivers, we can control the footprint of the VM, and we introduce and we load a Linux OS, our own Linux OS, Photon OS, inside that lightweight virtual machine. We run the extension of a spherelet and a container runtime in that virtual machine, and that allows us to actually start and run containers as a cloud, as a native element in the kernel itself. And so the Kubernetes control plane understands where a particular container runs. Now, what we do with the integration is that the actually Kubernetes control plane talks to DRS to figure out where should I run this machine, because you know best what the overall resource allocation is within a cluster. And that allows us to provide a access point to developers to interact straight and directly into our platform. So we created this new way of interacting with another persona. Typically, vSphere environments was only accessible to the vSphere ops teams, but now a developer can run as well. Now, what you have at that point in time, when you have the self-service environment, is that you have the risk of having somebody who don't really understand the overall platform, and they can overconsume everything. They can basically say, hey, I want to have this container with 200 vCPUs. Well, let's not go crazy here. So we needed to introduce something called a vSphere namespace as well, and that creates this guardrail for a particular developer or a group of developer, and they can deploy their own containers in that namespace, and the ops team define the limitations of that namespace. It can define the number of physical resources available through reservations, but also limits. It creates a role-based access moment or role-based access list, so only those developers can deploy in that namespace. So that's overall the idea of what we call the supervisor cluster. Mm-hmm. But that allows us also to actually run TKG clusters. So you can deploy a TKG cluster on the environment, because some developers, they want to have a specific Kubernetes version, or they want to have their own Kubernetes cluster, maybe because of permissions, or they don't trust other developers. And so we created this platform that can run containers natively, can run Kubernetes clusters really well. And now we're working on the last part that allows you to spin up particular services directly from that supervisor cluster. So think about a Cassandra database, or think about particular ML tools. So with a API call, a Kubernetes call, you can actually spin up a Cassandra service for your environment. Right. So these are the three pillars that we're introducing with Tanzu.
Right.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Thanks, Frank. I mean, that definitely makes sense. I mean, all our audience are more eager to know more and more about Kubernetes. With vLeaderConnect, we try to balance between the technology and the leadership aspect of a leader, which can motivate our audience, our VIAdmins to progress in their career. So we have, normally we do ask this question to every leader, and it's like, we are seeing that, I mean, situation is technology is evolving very fast. In last couple of years, it was a paradigm shift. Like we talk about vSphere with Kubernetes as the biggest release in a decade. So what would be your advice for all the VI admins here to, so that they stay relevant in this changing technology environment and mark their career at right place?
Yeah, and I think we're in a difficult time for that choice, because if you look at, like you said, we've gone through a paradigm shift, but also we're exploding on so many different new platforms and new ideas that it's extremely difficult to be a good generalist. So typically you always had this is the DBA, this is the storage person, this is the vSphere person, and at one point some people said, no, you need to understand everything. Now, if you only look at our own catalog, our own offering at VMware, it's extremely difficult to understand everything from every platform. So you need to make some conscious decision on where do I want to invest my time in. And to me, that always is a choice between where can I help my family with? So meaning that can I provide a livelihood to support everyone that I love, but also how can I enjoy myself in my work, right? And so there's this choice that you have to make between what seems to be popular and what seems to be interesting from a career perspective, but you also always need to understand the happiness of yourself. I can dive into security and to network because I know that's going to be a very popular topic. I would hate myself for doing that because I totally don't like that. So that's the choice that you need to make. But what I want to say is understand the overall directions that companies are going to and what the overall push is, but understand a particular element really well. And I think, and I'm not sure, but I think there's always use for a specialist. Same for me. I talk a lot about NUMA. I write a lot about NUMA, and there has been a time where people said, "Why are you still working on that? Because it's all about cloud now, and you don't need to know about that and all that stuff." And I'm like, "Yeah, in reality, right?" Sorry,
but cloud runs on hardware.
Exactly, right? And there's always this point where you really need to understand what's going on at the lowest level. And so I always remained focused on that element, with the possibility that I basically was putting myself out of bounds in that scenario because maybe nobody cared anymore. But what I wanted to say is that by focusing on that, what I truly loved and what I like to do, it's not really hard to spend much time on it. It's easier for me to learn and to develop if I actually have passion for it. And I think that's a key element in all of this. You can read a book that you don't like, but how much actually do you learn from that book if the topic is not interesting, right? It takes more energy, and you take that energy away from your other life, from your personal life. The moment you're bored or you're exhausted by dealing with that stuff, your family and your friends will notice. And I think that's a crucial element, because in reality, you can spend all your time working, and that's what I typically do. I work I do long hours a day because I really like my job. But you have to have memorable moments in your life. But now I'm getting old, right? Yeah. So I hope this helps. I don't have an answer for you, but that's how it works for me. So for me, that's why I focus on DRS. I focus on ML, AI, not necessarily because yes, it's interesting, and I know a lot of companies do it,
Right.
but there's this element to it that I enjoy talking about it. I think about the routes in the system that goes all the way up to the accelerator, and so I find my niche in that space.
Right, right.
Makes sense?
Okay. It
Frank,
makes sense.
not sure about other things, but I can confidently say that you are still young, so you don't need to. Right.
Yeah.
So,
So, yeah, Frank. So we have covered more questions to cover. Siddharth will take on from here. Siddharth.
Yeah,
so
so
that-
Frank, I think we have few questions, but I have to cut it short because now
Yeah.
we're running out of time otherwise, right? So I'll just ask one question which we have received from the community. So our colleague Vikash Shitole, so usually what we do is before this event, we launch a survey and send it to the community asking, what do you want to ask our guest, right? And we receive a couple of questions, and few of the questions which we have articulated in today's conversation has come from community. So you can understand the kind of inquisitive approach the community takes and how they want to understand what the leaders think. So this is particularly a question which is not related to technology. So my friend Vikash Shitole wants to ask you that a lot of people also would like to know, how do you manage your personal and professional life? And when you're not writing books or blogs, or when you're not solving customer problems, how do you manage your time? So basically he wants to understand what do you do in your free times, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, just send me over the other questions that I haven't answered, and I'm happy to answer those by email. That's not a problem. So how do I manage my work-life balance? Poorly, I would say. That's for sure. I have two boys, which I see on a regular basis, and I try to spend as much time with them as possible. I've got a son, Bodhi, who's 11, and Katie, who's 8. And so I try to spend time. If I don't work, and especially in the winter, I try to snowboard. Problem is, I live in the Netherlands. The name says by itself, we have no mountains. So I need to travel for that as well. So I picked the wrong sport, actually, to focus on. I follow basketball. So I do that on TV. And so what I do typically on a day is I start working from the morning until 8 in the evening, because I report to an American company. I have an American team, and that means on the West Coast. So that means they wake up at basically they start working at 6 for my time, 6, and then I typically work for noon their time. So that's 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock. That's basically my day. Now, on a personal level, I am a migraine patient. So that means that I cannot work every day, like full days, because if I have a migraine attack, I need to work around it. So I don't do time management, I do energy management. The moment I got my energy right is where I work the hardest, and where I focus on things that are matters the most. So I've got this idea of highlights, that I pick a highlight for every day, which I totally need to focus on. That's what I need to deliver that day, and I will make sure that I'll deliver that. And everything around it, that's bonus. So so today my highlight was the vLeaderConnect. I definitely need to make sure that that's the one that I should focus on. So I have blocked a half hour in front of it. I blocked half an hour behind it, so everything so I can make sure that I can spend all my energy and time on that. And other than that, it's just a flow of, well, giving back and forth, because I know due to my condition, I cannot say I start working at 8 and I stop working at 8, and that's my thing, because sometimes it's not possible. So I try to make do where possible. I hope that says something.
I think no, definitely. I think that's what matters most, because for most of us now, I think everybody's working from home, and you say it or not, but the working hours have already been extended, right? So now there's no time to work, and it is really important to focus what is your priority for the day and how do you manage your energy. So I like that statement really much, that I don't manage my time, I manage my energy, right? So that's really something which we all should learn. and we should abide to. By the way, thanks, Frank, for on behalf of the entire community for being here talking to us. We really had very fun conversation, a lot of topics which we touched upon, right? So everybody, when we started talking about this conversation, when we were planning for this event, everybody has a single thought in their mind that when we are talking to Frank, make sure you talk to NUMA about this topic. So we were like, yeah, nice. That is obviously something which we have to touch upon. Now, Frank, we definitely want you to extend, because now we are getting into a quiz, for our community, and our quiz master Vivek is here. It's not a compulsion, right? But we would love if you stay here. It's going to be a fun ride, because when Duncan was here, he really liked it, right? So he said, I really enjoyed this time. So let's see if it translates to you as well. So Vivek, over to you. I think you're sharing a wrong screen. You're giving answers also to the people.
I'm not looking. I'm just staring at
Yep. Just confirm if you're able to see my screen.
Yes.
Now it's right.
Folks, for people who have been on this quiz in past, you would know the rules. It's very simple. Just get your browser, go log into your browser on the mobile phone. You don't need to download any app for this. Open a browser, type www.menti.com, and the code is reflecting there on the screen. It's 6535073. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes for folks to join in.
This time I also want to play Vivek. Because I know all the answers.
No, there's definitely some surprise element that you're going to get, Sid, so it's fine. You can join.
Okay.
Frank, you're more than welcome to join the quiz.
Oh, okay. Let me see if that works. My Zoom just quit on me, so or my screen. Let me see.
Oh, no problem. Just get your.
You can join from your mobile phone. We're all using that mobile phone to join.
Well, I'm just in the transitioning from an old phone to a new phone, so nothing has set up yet. So let me grab 3507.
Glad to know all the leaders have the same common problems.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. See how many people have. For folks who have already joined, you may want to see your logos here. Oh. Okay. So yeah, we have plenty of people here on the call. Sid, should we start?
Yes, I think you should.
Yeah, so here you go. It's simple. Very, very easy question for you. Which of those are the new features which came up with vSphere 7? Take time, go through the options. vSphere with Kubernetes, assignable hardware, lifecycle manager, or a simple one, all of them, right? So, wow, we've got majority of the guys actually going right. But in short, all the answers are correct.
Yeah.
While we have to just put the right one. So, yeah, all of them is the ultimate right answer.
Now we'll see who's leading.
Not got it correct. Yeah. Folks who have not got it correct still have 4 more chance.
Siddharth, you joined, right?
So,
yeah, joined, but by the time I selected the answer, I was listening to Vivek and the time was up. Biswajit, this is not right. You know all the answer and still you're playing.
How fast did Kishore clicked? That was fast.
Right. So yeah, Kishore right now is leading. Let's see. Good luck, Kishore. Okay. Which of the VMware tool was replaced with the new vSphere 7 Lifecycle Manager? Again, go through the options. For all of you who've been following vSphere 7, I'm sure this would be the most easiest question. Compatibility guide, update manager, interoperability matrix, or all of them. I guess the answer was update manager. Good. We've got majority of the folks actually getting it right. I'm happy. People are following vSphere 7 updates. Let's see if Kishore is still leading it.
Ha.
He's not there.
You got it.
Okay, we've got a
Surprisingly,
new-
Frank, you are not in top 3.
I'm clicking as fast as I can. So I think it's a latency thing. It's a latency thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you can always blame the technology. Yeah, so we have
Exactly,
a new
always.
leader now. Asta is the new leader here. So we've got 3 more chances. Let's see. Yeah, what's the? Please, guys, note the question. Which is the fastest way to get started with Kubernetes? Right. Go to the options correctly. It's a little tricky question.
Reaction.
Even Frank is thinking.
I think I got it wrong. So
Okay. Not every time all answers are correct, buddies. The actual answer is vSphere 7 with Tanzu. So for folks who have been following the recent VMware announcements, vSphere 7 turns out to be the easiest and fastest way to get to Kubernetes. For folks who have ticked the second and the last option, which is VCF with Tanzu, that was the earlier option for customers who wanted to start with Tanzu on vSphere. But in short, if you're asking me what's the fastest, that's vSphere 7. But what's the best way to start with Tanzu? I think it would still be VCF with Tanzu. So yeah, let's see who's still leading it.
I'm interested to see what Frank has.
I'm still brainwashed about VCF, so I instantly went to vSphere with VCF.
Yeah. So yeah, we have new leader here, Gautam. I see our own colleague Arpita as well on the leaders board here. Good. Okay, so we've got one more question, or rather 2 more questions. Okay, easy one. What are the newest announcements in recent VM world? It will be easy for all the folks who have been going through the announcements. SASE was one of the newest announcements that we did. Disaster recovery as a service on VMC. Cloud Universal License, project monitoring. Guys, this should be easy one. Okay, let's see. Wow. Okay, yeah. Short answer, yeah, all of them are correct, but the right answer is all of them. Yeah, so all of these were some of the newest announcements. I would highly recommend each of you to go through this. There's plenty of blogs already available on them. Let's see who's leading it. Okay, I guess we will again have a new leader this time. No, Gautam still leads it. Let's see, the last question. Yep, one of the newest announcements that we have, or rather change the way we do this. How do we allocate GPUs resources to virtual machines? There are plenty of ways of doing them. We do it through NVIDIA GPU, through BitFusion, one of the recent announcements of VMware, or Direct Path IO. Right? So, yep. Short answer to that, all of them. Yeah, some of them were Direct Path IO was one of the oldest way of doing it, but yeah. Go through the newest announcements. There are plenty of exciting stuff that we are doing with NVIDIA with respect to GPU allocation to virtual machines. That's how this question was there. For folks who have not got it correct, any of the questions, we still have another surprise question for you. For all VIAdmins, this should be the cakewalk question, right? Oh wow, we've got a new leader this time. Suresh is leading it. Welcome, Suresh, on the leadership board.
Ha! I was the fastest.
Okay. Which is the new vSphere 7 logo? Guys, I want each and every one of you to get this question right. For everyone who've been working on VMware.
Oh my God.
Okay, so to answer your question, you have to click and then click on submit, guys. So some of the smartphones, you might have to go a little down. The correct answer, I think most of you are getting it right. The correct answer is the second one, the earlier one. Although the guys who got 22%, that's not the vSphere logo, that's the Kubernetes logo. Rather vSphere 7. So yeah, that's the logo for that. The right answer is the second one. Yeah, so glad most of you actually got it right. Let's see the winner for today. Yes, Ed.
So let's see the winner.
Frank, you got it fast.
Nice.
Okay, so Suresh is the clear winner here. We've got Chetan here. We've got Noor Mehmet. Well done, guys. So I would request each of you, Suresh, Chetan, Noor, just drop an email back to VMUG to collect your goodies.
VMUG.com. That's our email ID. Thank you, guys.
Over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
That was cool.
Exciting.
That was cool. Yeah, it's a fun thing.
Vivek, I'm muting you. I think I'm hearing you. So yeah, first of all, thanks to each and every community member for making it out. And it's Friday. It's 9 o'clock in India. It takes really a big deal to be in a virtual event at this particular point in time. Frank, we would like to thank you and appreciate your efforts for joining in, and we look forward to seeing you in future as well.
Yeah, my pleasure, and awesome to see so many people on that late join. It's always incredible to see the passion that our community has, and if there is when we can travel again, and that takes some time, and we're all on a strict travel policy right now, I'm more than happy to come and visit you in real life, so I can talk more about NUMA and all the other stuff. Right?
We would love to hear a lot from you, Frank. Honestly, this conversation can go on and on and on and on, but we will have to close it. So thanks a lot from the community and all VMUG Pune members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
Frank.
night.
Take care.
Bye-bye.